Hello, how's it going? A little awkward, a bit of a start. Welcome to the full season retrospective of the whole shebang. Lost Girl in the Boiling Isles. All 26 chapters done, over with. Don't have to, write anymore for now. This project, just kind of to start a little thing, this project has taken me over 2 years of work, and especially in the last couple of years or so, it's been, or a couple months or so, I would say from January to now, it's been just non-stop writing and making stuff, edits, changes to, chapters as I go. As I'm making them, putting a lot more focus on quality and stuff like that, and it's been very exhausting. So, I come to this recording after I just got off work and stuff, so I'm a little tired, so sorry if I'm a little, if I look very tired. I mean, I'm also talking to the camera, and you've never seen me physically, let alone heard my voice, unless you follow my other stuff. This is probably your first time seeing me, so yeah, I mean, I guess let's get started. I have a whole list of notes, so let's start with the origins of the whole thing. It's really funny because you would think, oh, I just had the idea and then I wrote it. There's some history, there's some prehistory as well. So back in 2022, I don't know why I was compelled to do this, but I got high or whatever. I had a couple edibles, and that was when I first was introduced to the Ale House, and I watched that when I was super high. So I had these vivid moments and memories of every episode when I first watched, and I was I felt, this was before season 2 as well, so I was or season 3, so I was really I had this one first impression from this very delirious state of mind that just kind of kept revolving in my mind over the next couple months. And then in August of that year, I was really bored and really depressed, so I decided to write this one fic that I wrote 300 pages worth of stuff over the course of a few months, and it was bad. It was really bad, based off of an original character that I was planning on using for something else, in a more professional setting, but I didn't even know that I was gonna be a writer yet, so it was just kind of a whatever situation, and I was terrible. There's some good stuff there, and with that, there was a lot of ideas in my mind near the end when I was kind of improving that I wanted to bring back in some way, in a more substantial capacity, and kind of flesh it out in a better way, and it just so happens that after I'd wrapped up the season 1 of that, I came across this screenshot edit. I'm blanking on the name of the person because I think they deleted their account. But it was this Twitter post, and it had it had edits of Amity in place of Luce on different 2 different screenshots. There was one from, I know one was from Reaching Out, and the other was from, I'm blanking on where the other one was from, but that inspired me instantly. I was okay, what do I want to do? I felt inspired with these story ideas, and so I was in this little Discord server I had with my friends. I just kind of started writing, like, just kind of throwing out ideas of, like, oh, well, what would happen if Amity was the human instead? And that was kind of that logical beginning point where I'm like, okay, how different would things be? Not just, like, from a, okay, swap them, done perspective, but, like, a very much narrative, how will things be different perspective? And, it led to stuff like, Grom being the first, like, big thing that I'd thought of. The events of it, the entire thing, like, at least of, like, the actual Grom portion, entirely, like, figured out pretty much as early as I could make it. And so, my goal was, like, okay, if I want to write something about this, I want to get to this point so that I can hit this story beat. And so, I kept talking with my friends, and eventually I was like, okay, how about I just, like, do it? And I wrote, like, a chapter 1. It was a very early version of chapter 1, and I sent it to my friends, and I was like, okay, what do you guys think? And they gave me, like, a few notes here and there, and I was like, okay, cool. So I have this chapter 1. I fixed it up, and I'm like, all right, cool. I have chapter 1. And at the time, because I was doing this thing where I'd originally uploaded my old fic 2 chapters at a time. And one of the things I really liked about that was, like, kind of starting out with, like, a good bit of stuff to read. So, like you kind of get the initial hook of the intro, and you get your first, like, major story beat. And to me, I would have combined them, like, nowadays, just because of how short they were. But, that's how it was. And then once I finished chapter 2, I passed to my friends again, and they're like, all right, cool. And that's when I sort of threw out and I posted it for the first time. And originally I had plans to continue into season 2 of that old fic. That never happened because this became what it was. And from, like, chapter 3 onward, it was literally just that was my focus. But yeah, so now that you kind of have the general history of it and the prehistory, let's get into the lightning round of chapters where I will talk about, like, small comments here and there, the different eras that I have, and just kind of, like, small things that I'd like to bring up and my opinions on them, because I have a lot. When you've been writing something for over 2 years, some of your earlier work kind of looks worse. One of the big things to me is that the prose is a lot worse. I was writing in this weird mixed present and past tense that I don't do now. I write almost exclusively in past tense, unless the story demands it, where you want to be in present tense. But, like, I would jump tenses a lot, and I feel like for something like this that is, third person omniscient, and occasionally limited depending on how I want to go about things, I saw no reason to actually continue doing that, and there's going to be a very distinct point where you can tell that I started taking writing more seriously. But to just kind of list the eras, we have 3 eras. We have the pre-convention era. That's sort of the Wild West of the plot was kind of moving, but I didn't have, like, a major plan behind it. It was just, like, get to Grom, and, like, what are the steps there? And so I had a lot of, like, just, like, I want to do this, and this leads to this, so kind of point A, point B stuff. And this is before I, like, kind of started pursuing writing as, like, a thing I wanted to do, as, like, my main passion. So a lot of, like, the quality is hit or miss. A lot of it definitely kind of reeks of typical fan fiction pitfalls. And then the second major era, so yeah, pre-convention is chapters 1 to 13. The second era spans chapters 14 to 19, so a bit shorter, but I think there is a very distinct difference between this one and the next one. is the school era or the Grom era. And this is sort of the big lead up into Grom with, this is me post convention, which I feel like was my best chapter at that point, and that's at the halfway point, conveniently speaking, which is really funny. And that was about a year after I'd first started. So, chapter 13 comes out, and I take this long break to work on some short story projects and write my book and stuff. And so you get the Grom/school era, which really elevates the writing and leads into Grom, which to me is my personal favorite chapter. I think it's the best I've written. And then there's the post-Grom era, which I like to call post-Grom or endgame, where basically everything is building up to the finale, and there's only like one chapter that's like a slight non sequitur, but is more just kind of important character building. And that spans 20 to 26, or I consider the two-part finale 25 and 26. So, take that as you will. I've also considered the chapters like episodes, because that's sort of how I like to structure them, is like episodes of the show. But let's get started with episode 1 and 2, Finding Home and Living a Dream. This is instantly, I look back and I knew that this was the start of a chapter, like a naming structure that I despise now. But I committed to for so long, and I hate that I did it. And you'll see that there's points where I'm just stretching it as far as I can. Anyway, so chapters 1 and 2 are definitely the most disconnected of the chapters from the rest of the story, mostly because there is a lot of ideas that I had at the time that just were not applicable. Going forward, especially going into even chapter 5, there was a lot of stuff that I was like, we're not going here anymore, we're not doing this anymore. And you see some inklings of that, especially with the prominence of someone like Warden Wrath and stuff like that. So a lot of the characterization was also up for grabs. I feel like Amity specifically, I tried to keep as close to her personality in chapter 2 as possible to what I wanted for the rest, and just sort of kind of build from there. I think one of my favorite parts about chapter 1 and 2 is specifically just how much extra time I put into the dialogue. At the time, I was really slow at writing. I wasn't writing very fast, so I put a lot of really good emphasis on the dialogue. And one of the big focuses of that was also, really showing Amity's difference in strength compared to Luce, whereas Luce is a lot more chaotic, a lot more impulsive. Amity's more focused and is more observant. So, she's going to solve puzzles in a different way than Luce would. And I also wanted to really, really focus in on making it as original as possible. Obviously, there's the whole thing of the conformatorium, but I was like, I'm going to relocate it. I'm going to put it in this mysterious area, and it's going to be based on the Good Witch Azura 3 or whatever the heck chapter or whatever. This is a running theme with the whole fic, is just I didn't focus it on the Good Witch Azura canon pretty much at all. So there is a lot of contradictions on knowledge of what happens in each book, what is going on, who knows what's going on. So that's a problem. But a lot of it is more for the gag. So the whole bit of the conformatorium being basically just structured exactly like the Black Tower from the Good Witch Azura 3, I think was a fun thing that I did back then, and I still stand by that. I think I would still do it, and I even made a direct reference to it in the finale, with the with the Good Witch Azura 64, like the strategy guide. That's one of my favorite jokes. But I'm getting off topic. Chapters 1 and 2 to me are the beginning of like 3 different stories that you could probably find from it. But there was like a lot of key moments I wanted to nail there. I wanted to get the one, establish that Amity is trans, but like not explicitly. So there was like, I kind of sprinkled it throughout, and that was the whole theme going up into Grom, was like this hesitance and this gender struggle. And so, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have the pills, and I'm gonna have her like be like asked like, do you think I'm a girl or whatever. And that to me, I felt was like an obvious like, yes, this is what's happening, but she doesn't feel comfortable yet to say it. And so many people didn't pick up on it, and they were so confused. I was like, oh god, is this what I'm working with? Obviously, like, I really stuck to my guns and was like, I'm not going to explicitly mention anything. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm just going to focus on the story and not like, be like, no shit, she's trans. Like, read the tags. But I also wanted to, keep to the integrity of like, you don't need external like hints and other material to enjoy the story. You should be able to enjoy it from start to finish, without any extra notes. Obviously, I started writing more notes just to kind of be more personal, but none of it like was specifically meant to like substitute for parts of the story itself. Also, this is going to be a theme going into like chapter 3 and onward. My pacing is really fast. It's really fast. While I did have some good descriptive, just like set pieces, I felt like I moved the plot too fast. And that's why you get stuff that's like 10 to 20 pages, like less than 20 pages, like 10 to 15 pages. And to me now, with how like detailed I try to be, it's just not enough. So yeah, and as I said earlier, 1 and 2 nowadays, if I were to rewrite that section, they would be all one chapter. But back then, I wrote shorter chapters, so whatever. Chapter 3, Finding Your Flame. This was the stupidest chapter name, because it's named after a fucking Sonic Frontiers song that I was listening to. But it also just so happened to be applicable because, she learns her first spell. I'm a little iffy about the whole, like, jumping into, she meets Luz and she learns her first spell on chapter 3. I think it fits with the general, like, pacing of chapters 1 to 13. Of like the pre-convention era, but like nowadays I'm like, dude, we had like no time with like Ida and King, like what are you doing? But I wanted to get to Grom really fast, so that was like my first stepping stone. But this was like the first chapter overall that had like a focus and started moving the plot forward. This was like, okay, here are the beats of what I want to get to Grom. What's the first thing we meet? I want to have Lumity as a part of it, so Luz is going to be introduced instantly. What do we also need? We need spells, so we're going to have both of those together, and that's going to be a good moment, a good passionate moment. Get it, fire. Passionate and interesting, and sort of showed the dynamic between the characters, their differences, and sort of established that before we move into, okay, well now she's going to go to school, get into the school, and then just kind of move into that direction. It was too early, but it was fun. There was also the stuff with King with the demon stuff, and in an original draft of the story that I had in my head, and I think I have the outline somewhere, that was going to be a major theme of season 1. with the demon stuff kind of reflecting the trans stuff, and that being a big part of like the conforming to like social norms and stuff. You know, the conformatorium, Warden Wrath, and so, you know, I really wanted to set that up early. That got pushed back a lot just because of extra stuff I wanted to do, so there's going to be a lot more in Season 2 regarding this, but all plans for like the Season 1 stuff got scrapped very quickly. I referenced it a little bit in chapter 26, but it fell to the wayside pretty early on, and that's again one of the issues of early Lost Girl, is just like it lacked a focus. Anyways, back to the chapter. I really like, when I was first thinking about it before I was rereading, I'm like, this one's gonna be good, but I don't know how good. And I picked up really fast that I'm surprisingly good at the character connections. Like, Luce and Amity's hitting it off actually went surprisingly better than I remembered, and just like sort of establishing their differences immediately. Like, Luce is a lot more confident in herself, in the sense that she's more her, and her arc is more focused on, you know, like improving herself and like proving to herself that she's worth something, and that like people do care for her, because like her original arc is about being like misunderstood and not really, and feeling out of place, but here Luce feels like she is where she's supposed to be, but she doesn't know what she's doing with that. And then another difference that I really wanted to focus on was that Amity's a lot more book smart, and so her way of learning magic is going to be a lot more, she's going to be studying more to like learn her magic, and is going to be, and the whole like idea of glyphs and expanding that to like, it's the language of magic, and how you can kind of logic your way to glyphs if you are like smart enough to figure it out. And that's an implication that comes way later with another character who knows glyphs. And I felt that was like I wanted to expand the magic system more in an interesting way, while also, you know, being like, okay, Amity is able to learn in her own way, and she's going to start with the first spell that we see her learn in the show, and that was fire magic. And so the fire magic is supposed to reflect like not only just like this is what we first see her learn, it's also like it shows her passion and her like start of love for Luce, if that makes any sense. Anyways, let's I feel like I've touched on that pretty well. What am I trying to say? Anyway, chapter 4, Finding Friends. This one I go back and forth on, because I feel like if it was like a few thousand words longer, I would love it a lot more, because I feel like the beginning is so strong, and then the end is just kind of, it's good. I liked it. It was the first time I ever started doing like straight up cliffhangers, and I think the cliffhangers got a little out of a hand at a certain point, but I still like the cliffhangers, because it's like, tune in next time for whatever, you know, that sort of thing. And again, like, this was another instance of me wanting to deviate from the source material. I wanted to really just like hone in on, this is different, because the original fic was so derivative. I would honestly call it plagiarism. At times where it would just take plot beats, and I would just rewrite the exact same plot beats just with a different character and the reactions and stuff. So this was like I am deviating instantly. Hexside's gonna look a little different. Willow and Gus are gonna be slightly different because, you know, they have a unifying force, which is Luz, to kind of ground them and make them feel more at home. So Willow is going to already be doing plant magic and stuff like that. And then I also wanted to, like, show that, like, I wasn't changing the characters entirely. So Luz still has, like, her craftiness and, like, chaotic side from the original show, except, you know, it's different. And she kind of brings in Willow and Gus a lot more. And so, like, their flaws are different, and that creates for a more interesting story arc, so I'm not rehashing the same stuff. And this is also just because, like, you know, if you're reading it, you're probably already watched the show, so you already know how this stuff hashes out. Fun stuff. The stuff with Luz at the beginning I found was very fun. Francois being found super early is really funny because he never shows up again. I don't know what the plan was. I think I was like, I want Francois immediately. And I never did anything with him. Sorry, I was drinking some water. Yeah, the stuff with, like, the fighting and kind of showing, Amity sort of getting over that, just that inability, those inhibitions, from, like, being overwhelmed by this world around her that she's still adapting to, and, like, having those, like, badass moments to, like, really stick it to everyone. I felt like I really nailed that pretty well. Detention guards could have been handled a little better. You know, again, that ending portion I felt was a little rough. But the principal bump and the Ida conversation, to me, I think still holds up pretty well. And again, sort of starts some of those early themes for Ida that would lead further in and kind of show, like, okay, she's got some history and a little bit more history than in the original show. And again, it's just so fast. I'm going to be repeating this a lot going up until chapter 13, but it's just so fast. It moves too fast sometimes. And there's not a lot I can do about that now. I don't have any plans on rewriting these chapters because it's just, again, I want to keep the original, like, I don't want people who have already read it to then come back and go back and suddenly it's different. I want to show my progression throughout, because I feel like, you know, it's an exercise, right? You know, you get better as you go. And I think it loses some of that texture of the original that if I were to write it in my current style, it may not have the same impact because I would basically be changing so much. Okay, chapter 5, Finding Family. I have right here, in quotes, the first anime fighting chapter. This is going to be a theme, especially going into later ones. I've always been a fan of, like, shonen manga and shonen anime and just kind of general combat martial arts stuff. And I really liked the fights in the original show. So I really wanted to focus in on, like, not focus, but I really wanted to kind of dip my toe into the combat aspect of magic a little more. And I would be kind of, like, very touch and go with it at first, but I didn't really want to push it initially because I felt like one of my flaws, which the original fic, was that there was too much emphasis on the fighting, and I lost some of the sauce and the just depth of the character interactions because it was just descriptions of fighting. And I don't think I was a good enough writer at the time to write something that is interesting for a fight like that. And so chapter 5 was like that first time after a few months of just honing in on my craft to try my hand again at the anime fighting. And I felt like the perfect way to do that is to show, like, Ida is powerful. One of my issues with the original show was that I feel like Ida wasn't really shown to be the most powerful witch until the very end of season 1. And so I really wanted to show more of that. Ida is the strongest. Undoubtedly, she can just walk into a precinct and just go and not be fazed by anyone. And obviously, a part of that is her determination towards like saving King, but it was more of like I really wanted to show like Ida's kind of a badass. She's really strong. And then also I wanted to be like, she's a wild witch. She knows a bunch of different wild spells. Why isn't she using the different tracks of magic? She like barely ever does that in the original show, and I really wanted to do more of that. And also kind of give Lilith that, because, you know, she's a part of the Emperor's Coven. She's able to freely use her magic. And I wanted them to have a lot more direct parallels in that way. And then I also wanted to reveal the Owl Beast. Because that was one of the hardest things for me, is that I really didn't know how I was going to handle the Owl Beast and the curse in general. Because I didn't want it to be exactly the same. And, you know, without the light glyph, it's a lot harder to be like, that's how she wakes up. So I had it be like, she gets transformed into it by Lilith deliberately setting her up to transform. And then there's that little portion with Lumity, and we, you know, meet Morton, who is working with Luce and giving her little tips and little recipes to get better at potion making, because, you know, I didn't mention it, but Luce is like a potions witch, and I felt like that made a lot of sense for her character, because, you know, she doesn't know a lot of like by hand spells, but she's really, really good with potions, and kind of seeing that she's ahead of the curve in some ways, but a little weaker in others. And so kind of establishing like, yeah, she's like best friends with this like potion maker, and it just so happens that this exact potion maker is making the elixirs. Hooray, we have the elixirs, and let's go cross paths and get them with Ida. You know, fun stuff. Sorry, I'm just like reading over my stuff. Yeah. The fighting I felt was really surprisingly good for my first like run at it, like major run at it with this series, and I'm happy that it turned out as well as it did. There were some skills that I'm like, this is too advanced. Why did I like, these are glyph combo stuff, but you know, at the time I wanted cool, so I went with cool. So yeah, I really like this chapter. I think overall it's really fun and enjoyable. Chapter 6, Finding Perspective. I don't know if this is my least favorite chapter or not. I'm not sure if I like this or not. So this is one of the problems I had, is that there are like 3 or 4 chapters in here that are just like, I haven't written in a little bit, or I need to fill in this plot point, but I don't know how, or I need this to happen. I just need to come up with something. And at least this one had the benefit of having a flashback, and the flashback being this huge point and really showing like human realm more. And this was the second flashback. So the last chapter had the flashback with the bullies. This one had the flashback with Edric, and I really was like, okay, I did 2 flashbacks in a row. I'm gonna like give it a few chapters with the flashbacks, and then we'll go back to them. And I never did it again. Oops. Again, this is kind of my problem, where I'm not planning as much. But this was definitely what I would consider kind of a filler chapter. Obviously, you know, she's learning potions. She learns how to make a potion. So, you know, that's cool. But the potion she makes, the little enhancement potion, was cool. But the way that she uses it and practices with her fire magic, take it or leave it. I definitely kind of phoned it in with this one, I'm going to be honest. That's all I can really say about it. Chapter 7, Finding Freedom. I don't know why it's called that. Why is it called that? I don't even remember. It's the entrance exam. And it goes fine. It's okay. The dialogue's fun. Again, the character moments are good, and there's more like Trans Amity stuff in there. But there's also just more like, it's, again, I don't know what funk I was in while writing chapter 6 and 7. I don't know. It's hard. Anyways, now that we're done with those two things that I have nothing to say about, chapter 8, Finding Understanding. This, to me, was a very important chapter in terms of, like, the overall scope of the fic going forward. This is where I really had a plan of, like, this is where I want to start, and this is where I want to end with this sort of run of chapters. And that would be the going up to convention. So, you know, we have this loose chapter, and then the next one will be, you know, the first day, and then more Lumity chapters until we get into convention and really build that up. So this one, having Luz, you know, completely grounded after, you know, the detention guards, and going out and fighting Lilith and sort of lying to her mom about the fact that, you know, she was fighting, you know, the head of the Emperor's Coven, but just, like, you know, she was roughhousing. And so her mother, Camila, is like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? You know, your antics are going a little too out of hand. And so I really wanted to establish two major things, Manny and Camila, as major points of the series. Manny especially being just the big, like, hook for the rest of the season, and going into season 2 as well. And so, you know, his book and Camila, like, being adverse to wild magic for a reason that I felt was pretty clear, but you know, I guess depends on if you pick up on it or not, of, like, you know, Manny being involved with wild magic and wanting to avoid that so that Luz doesn't have to experience that pain and suffering and potentially get herself cursed like Manny did. I also really wanted to focus on, you know, the glyph magic being different and being, again, the more language of the original archetypes of magic and like the basic building blocks of it, whereas, like, just drawing a spell circle would create magic from you. It's more of summoning magic from the elements, controlling the elements, and expanding that idea more, so that, like, if you see a glyph as, like, you know, a witch or whatever, you can still use the same sort of methodology of that glyph in your magic and get a slightly different effect. And so that's why you get, like, the crackling, you know, ice glyph and stuff through the ice surrounding Luz when she's having a breakdown. It's because of that. Otherwise, I really wanted to also have, like, that Boiling Isles perspective. So, you know, that conflicted nature about wild magic and sort of someone who's breaking out of that system. And also because I wanted to have a different character perspective, like a really stark different character perspective. Chapter 9, Finding Frontiers. Again, these names are just killing me. They're killing me. This is the first day chapter. This is where Amity gets the scar on her face and more, like, you know, trans Amity crumbs. Again, there were parts of me that, like, with those screenshot edits, I wanted to replicate parts of the design, but I also wanted to sort of create my own design in my head. And so I feel like the scar was, like, a perfect sort of representation of how, like, she's changed a little bit going into her first day at magic school. And a question that no one's brought up, but I feel like is worth answering anyways, is why did she pick Abominations? It's explained, but I also want to kind of clarify more that Abominations isn't just something that's like, oh, because of the source material, but because it fits her character and sort of how she views things. And so Abominations are very mechanical. They're very much research focused and about problem solving. And, you know, the original show is like, this is the most powerful form of magic. Or like, you know, the most powerful witches are from that track. And, you know, having that be a lot more like knowledge based, being sort of a counterpart to Potions, which is sort of, it's like a reflection of Potions where it's very knowledge based, but you still have to be very proficient at magic to do Abominations in the first place. And so, you know, her desire to research allows, like, fits well with that and creates this sort of arc again. Like, I have a lot of stuff being set up that gets paid off way later. And, you know, also just, like, I wanted to have another spell, and it's like, okay, Luz found the ice spell, so Amity's gonna have that, and sort of have this hint at glyph combos as well, with the broken glyph combos that are, like, all, like, stuck to each other in the notepad, morphing into an Abomination-like thing, that eventually comes back a little later in a subtle way. Basha, literally the moment she sees the scar, bam, attracted to Amity, because I interpreted that one scene in season 3, episode 2, for the future, where I'm like, okay, obviously Basha wants to, like, be with Amity. They're gay. I want to write this into something a little bit more substantial. And, you know, like, Basha's obsession with Amity, despite their rivalry at the end, is really funny to me. Because I don't know why I wrote that. I think because I did walk it back later, and I think, you know, I did it tactfully. You know, that was fun. Because originally, it's funny. Originally, Basha was just supposed to be Amity's rival, and it turned into Luz and Basha being rivals, even down to the whole, like, light bulb nickname, which is really funny because I'm surprised no one has, like, asked why Basha calls her light bulb. It's literally because her name is Luz, and Luz means, like, light. So the joke is that Basha is trying to be mean-spirited, and she calls her light bulb, just kind of to demean her. Also, light bulbs aren't even a thing in the demon realm, so, like, you know, it makes it really funny. And also, just, like, another thing, establishing Basha as the top student now and being, like, the best in place of Amity, again, sort of that ripple effect that I was talking about earlier, of, like, small changes that make a big impact. And then the establishment at the very end of, like, hey, let's hang out, or whatever, for more Lumity stuff. Because I was really pushing it at the time. Chapters 10 and 11 I'm going to talk about as a collective, finding familiarity and finding feelings, because they're two parts of the same story. Because I wanted to have the cliffhanger of pre-string being and post-string being. So, really establishing the relationship, really kind of showing that they're both special to each other, and kind of, you know, being like, hey, this is kind of why they end up together so early, is because they're having these deep connections early. And then also, you know, the Palisman egg being a creation of Manny, being passed down to Luz, so that you still have the Palisman egg and string bean still exists. Yeah. And also, it's really funny, this was, like, the first time that I really did the flirting And I originally was like, this is gonna be so bad. I forgot what my dialogue was at the time, and I'm like, oh, this is actually like pretty good flirting. You know, it aged pretty well, surprisingly. Luz being understood finally, you know, kind of, you know, hitting that beat early of like, hey, someone understand that she is in pain and feels inadequate. You know, I wanted to keep that in. And then Luz finding string beans, getting string beans so early and having a palisman was, I don't know if anyone picked up on it, but at the point of the whole thing was that, you know, witches are supposed to get their palismans when they're ready for it and they're able to do magic on their own proficiently. And she was still very early on with like her just general physical skills. So, you know, she ends up leaning more and more on her palisman over time and is unable to kind of fight or like function without string bean. And, you know, there's like crumbs in there of like her being able to do advanced magic and other wild magic things. She just isn't consciously able to do it. And, you know, it creates this difficult situation for Luz that'll be basically plaguing her for a while and plagues her like into the finale, but she's still able to get better. It's just she's not there yet. Let's see. Amity being able to use the palisman. I have it written here, and I quote, Amity is able to use a palisman fine because she's got the gifted kid buff. Fair enough, me who wrote these notes. Yeah. The kiss at the end, I wanted to establish their love pretty much instantly. Not instantly, but I wanted to establish their love and be like, hey, this is what this means. And then I just don't get them. They don't get together for another 15 chapters. I thought Grom was going to come a lot sooner, and it didn't. It did not. It took a long time. These, to me, are my, like, if I had to pick my favorite early chapters, God, these might be it. Because as, like, I go through over these again, some of these I'm like, dude, Finding Family is really good. I love it. But then I look at these two and I'm like, dude, I love these. These are great. I love them. Finding Knowledge, chapter 12. I love how in my notes I have more anime fighting. Yay! You know, introducing the upper bounds of magic and sort of loosely tying it to Manny. Just as a bit of a side thing, the author of Upper Bounds of Magic kind of having that Gravity Falls style thing, people had some wild ideas about who wrote the book, and I'm like, I feel like I made it obvious, but I also think, you know, if you're reading it only month to month, maybe you forget some details. It was fun seeing people predict who wrote it, and people who got it correct, people who didn't. Someone said Odalia one time, and I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, it'd be funny, but no. No. I also wanted to establish more kind of Ida backsliding a little bit, but also like firming herself up and being like, no, I'm not going to let this curse get to me. I'm going to get better. I'm going to beat Lilith. We're not going to, you know, repeat that first loss. So, you know, really getting into that. And I also wanted to introduce sort of the scope of the Isles more, because season 1 really sticks to Bonesboro a lot. I wanted to be like, all right, we're going to take this to Letissa, because it's a really like kind of crime heavy area, and they probably have plenty of these books, So we're going to do that. We're going to go there. And then had the little fight in the precinct archives, which I felt was actually surprisingly really good. Reestablishing, like, hey, they can do all kinds of magic. There's no issues. And then at the end, I have the plant glyph as being like, hey, look at this. The plant glyph. It's Manny. No shit. And I had no plans for it. There was no connection at all. I just wanted it to be there to be like, Manny wrote this. If you can't figure it out, that's your problem. But also as a teaser to be like, that's the next glyph that Amity's going to learn several chapters later. And finally, we reach chapter 13. Finding Rivals, or what I would call it now, Convention. The exact halfway point in the story, and the first super in-depth fight in the entire series. Normally, it would be a few paragraphs long or a few actions before we move on to the rest of the plot. This, I wanted to be like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish this rivalry between Luz and Basha, and we're going to have the witches duel, and it is going to be substantial. I want to really show my difference in style compared to the original text, and at the time, I wanted to write something better than the original episode, and I'm not sure I did, but at the time, I felt proud that I could do it and make it interesting. And I brought up the Lightbulb name or nickname earlier, but this was the first time that it showed up for real. The convention sort of being like a way of Luz getting out of the whole, grounded situation, coming out of that and seeing her friends again, and just, obviously having the joke reasons for why her friends got detention was fun. Amity being very, closing herself off after the kiss and stuff like that. And, leaving Luz to just kind of be on her own with her thoughts while she's at, the convention. And sort of this idea of the whole system breaking down in her mind. And it being hard for her to believe in it. And so, we get to the whole Basha and Luz thing with the witches duel and having the stakes of, like, you can't go to school anymore sort of deal, and Lilith having her whole end of like, okay, if you win, then I'll drop all charges on you and I won't arrest you. Fun stuff. And then the fight itself, I was like, okay, we got two potion witches. We've never seen people use potions in a fighting capacity, I think, ever. Which is really funny. I think, like, there's, like, a use in the first day, I think. And that's it. And so I was like, okay, no, I want to take this potions gimmick to its extreme and see how you can fight with it. And so, there's the different, like, arena styles and the different, like, boosts and abilities. And even Basha getting, like, the Bowser-esque fire breath and stuff like that. I felt was really I really liked that I did that. And despite the prose being a little weak, I feel like I described the fight in a very good way, and sort of establishing this very different approach towards fighting between Luz and Basha, whereas Luz is a lot more reactional, like, is more sort of deflecting stuff, and then is then throwing everything at the wall when she has the opportunity, whereas Basha, she's a lot more aggressive, and she's more prone to make mistakes in her decision making, so she, like, messes up a lot more because she's overconfident with her abilities. And, you know, this is a running theme, but Luz has to plan around Basha being way stronger than her, so she has to, like, use her abilities and her slight advantages in some areas to get the best over Basha. And, you know, she wins because of String Bean, but at the same time, you know, that was one of her assets, so she could use it. And that makes Basha lose her mind and just break down and have these major issues. And then I wrote down the Coven Heads section. This was an original portion of the story that didn't get written. And this is, again, after Convention is when everything smooths out. This may come back in season 2. I haven't really, like, perfectly thought about it. I just wanted to have it for the sake of having the Coven Heads. There's nothing really deep about it. Upper Bounds of Magic getting in Basha's hands this early and then it not being used for a while is really funny to me. But I think it also is more in character for her to be like, ew, why would I read this book? Whatever. Or like her trying to open it over time and she's like, eh, and moving on. Alright. I have a small little intermission before we get into the next chapters. So, after chapter 13, I took a little bit of a break, and I started writing short stories, just to kind of do a little bit more personal work outside of fanfiction. And I wrote a few horror short stories, and then started work on a book. And so, a lot of the fic plans sort of fell to the wayside while I focused on that, and I improved a lot more as a writer, a storyteller, and refined my craft more. And basically, before I even got back into the fic, after I was decided I'm gonna take a break from writing my book, and I'm going to just focus on what I want the rest of the season to be. And from that point forward, I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to now push for that general plan and outline throughout the rest. Not every chapter was planned out, but it was definitely these are the beats I need to hit to get to the next section and get to the end of the season. Early portions of the story, I mentioned this before, but the prose, the structuring, and the general word choice and diction was just kind of rough around the edges, and I improved a lot more at that with, doing a lot more writing related activities and learned a lot more. And honestly, if there's one thing that I do regret going post chapter 13, it's that I fell into this cycle of what I said earlier, of just the anime fighting, where most every chapter had to have some form of fight in it. And there's just something about those first 13 chapters and the groundedness of them that I might want to capture more going into season 2, and I wish I captured more for the second half. Speaking of the second half, chapter 14, what a weak way to start the second half, huh? Gus stuff, what a weak way to learn glyph combos, right? With the wand, kind of getting the wand in there, wanting more, access to be like, hey, more abomination struggles. Hey, learn a glyph combo. I think to me this might be the worst. Outside of the general structure of it and just the general word choice and writing, it's a weak story. It's short And it literally is such a weak way to introduce the glyph combos, and I would totally do it differently if I did it today. Chapter 5, I didn't even say the name. Finding New Horizons. Bad name. Chapter 15, Finding a New Path. This is where I really started stretching things like Taffy. This is the Basilisk episode. And at the time, I called this really long. It was like, I think 22 to 23 pages. It was like 20 something pages. The average chapter is like 20 pages now. This is like really funny that I called it long at the time, because I'd spent like a month and a half on it continuously. It's really funny. Adding the tertiary cast of like Viney, Gerbo, and Barkus just to kind of be there, but not really have a proper setup until later in season 2. But, you know, establishing the different history, and sort of giving the Basilisk situation a more unique touch. So it's like, okay, Viney is going to, like, has been bouncing around these tracks because she doesn't like any of them, and she wants the multi-track, but she can't, and her friends got attention for wanting the multi-track. So we still have that similar motivation of the first day, while also having that more dramatic element of, like, you know, Luz and Viney having this rivalry because, spoilers, Willow and Luz dated, and they're exes. Fun stuff. And so, you know, I really, this is the first chapter to me that showed that I am improved as a writer, because the structure, the story, the action, everything felt to me on point. And especially, I really wanted that climax to just hit, and it hit so hard, and I'm so happy that it worked out. And this was also my first sort of setup of wanting to do A plot, B plot. I don't like doing that. I feel like it takes away from the general story. Unless the two plots are directly connected, I kind of don't like it. But, you know, that's like my writing style in general. The multi-tracking gets introduced. I had a hard time deciding on, you know, the general scope of Amity's multi-tracking. I was like, she's not the kind of person to multi-track entirely. So, you know, being potions to be with Luz, you know, and, you know, staying in Abominations. And then putting her in Plants was a bit of a too obvious setup, but I'm fine with it because I think it gets her more to see Willow. And, you know, having more of those character interactions, I enjoy. Hunter being, again, this prevalent force now as the Golden Guard of, like, kind of testing Amity. So while Lilith is going after Ida, Hunter's going after Amity and kind of testing her and seeing what she's made of. And then also just having more Ida reflection, getting her mental state independent of other characters. I like that. I wish I could rewrite it a little better, but I think it still gets the point across. I still think that little B-plot section of running the big market day was fun. There's some good comedy there. Chapter 16, Finding Relief. It's basically another filler chapter, and it just kind of is the meeting point between the two groups of King and Amity and Ida, and making sort of this big, powerful, like, point of, like, they are better together. And it gives a good reflection of the characters, and I really wanted to settle myself in with these characters and be like, this is what I want them to be, and establish specifically what I want rather than the wishy-washy relationship that I felt I had originally. Also, the chapter itself was a big point for me writing the fic as a whole, because originally, after I'd started writing other stuff that wasn't fanfiction related, I saw this as more of a distraction rather than a thing that I enjoyed as a hobby. And so, you know, as I improved with this stuff in that one chapter, I realized that, like, you know, this is the thing I do for fun. It's practice. It gets me engaged, and it helps me tell this big story I want to tell. The V teaser. Oh, God. I don't know what to say, man. I feel like I nail these like cliffhangers, but then some people don't get it. V being non-binary to me, like, is not like because they're a shapeshifter or anything, but I just wanted more non-binary rep, and I feel like, to me, I always headcanoned them as non-binary, so I decided to go with that angle, and I think it's a good reflection of Amity being trans. Chapter 17, Finding Flora. This is, of the finding chapters, I definitely got, like, the most creative with these last two. This is the Willow chapter. I really enjoyed this chapter, mostly because I was able to put in so much stuff that I'd been holding back for a while. In the original fic, I had this this place I called the Garden, and it was like this hidden portion of the forest with all these different flowers, and I really wanted to bring that setting back, and the general idea of, like, exploring this you know, hidden area in the forest where everything grows without interruption from society, and just, like, you know, have Amity engross herself in the plant magic and try to figure out what she's gonna do, while also being like, dude, there's, like, human plants here. How? And also, just, like, this extra focus on magic from a scientific angle that I really wanted to show that, like, this is what Amity, how she learns her magic. Then there's the loose side plot in here. Again, I was really trying to do the A plot, B plot stuff, kind of get practice with it before I ultimately decided to drop it. You know, getting more Manny lore and expanding on just kind of Luce's struggles outside of Stringbean and her potions. You know, that inadequate feeling that she has now that she, like, she's multi-tracking and she knows how to do none of it. So she has to start from square one. Another big thing I wanted to focus on with this chapter was Willow's abilities, because, you know, I hadn't really established, like, Willow is really powerful, really strong, and she is able to hold, like, this giant branch, a Deus Ex branch that falls for some reason that I made up on the fly and was like, sure, it's a giant branch, and she's able to lift this and, like, launch it into the air. Also sort of establishing, like, hey, you know, we're getting into these powerful, like, kind of character levels, so, like, you know, Hunter's, like, while he is toying with them, you know, they're able to be pretty level with him despite that, and are able to kind of give him a little bit of a challenge. And so, you know, he's, like, overconfident, but, like, you know, and he, like, starts losing, and that's, like, the, oh my god, he's, you know, is are they really getting to that level? And it's like, no, he was barely trying because, you know, he got overconfident. The exploding branch in midair was fun. I still envision that pretty vividly to this day. I still think it's one of the most fun little moments for me, with like the blowing up the branch with the fire magic. And then, you know, the little bubbles or whatever showing the plant glyph being shown to her as kind of a reward for bringing light to this sort of dark portion of the forest. And then ending with a bit of a crossover in the, like, whole, what? You fought the Golden Guard? Oh my god. Chapter 18, Finding Wrath. This, to me, if, like, we're talking Ida chapters, this is definitely one of the best ones. If not the best one that I've written. Just because it really just goes all in on the Ida's abilities. Like, yeah, she just, like, launched an entire portion of a cliffside super far across the ocean and then back at her at full speed, and she just kind of grabs it with ease and breaks it at full speed. You know, sort of having that parallel of what I wanted with the original concept of season 1 of, like, ending with, like, showing, like, they can beat Warden Wrath now. You know, his, like, whole, you know, representation of oppression. You know, it's like, okay, well, he gets his ass beat because, you know, Ida's just that badass. I also found the chapter really funny. My favorite little bit is the she can't possibly take all of us at once. Hard cut. They're all gone onto the ground. I found that kind of funny. The fight with Wrath being a lot more just kind of this one-sided Ida just beating him, but it being an intended little thing of, like, Lilith being like, alright, I'm just gonna chill until Ida wears herself out, and then I win. Easy. And then that little moment with Lilith being like, I don't know if I want to, like, kill her because, you know, her objective has been changed to kill the Owl Lady. You can't kill her. And then it follows up on the whole thing with, you know, they're beating the Golden Guard and they're like, we're together. We can't stop if we're together. And then the little ending with Lilith and Hunter being forced to work together to capture the Owl Lady and Amity. Big old cliffhanger before we get to the best chapter in the entire series. I don't think I can say it's a contest except for maybe the finale. I don't know. I think, to me, this is, like, the best and will remain the best for the foreseeable future, even going into season 2 stuff. Even with my initial plans, I just don't think much will beat this emotionally charged chapter that has been, at the time, it was like a year and a half in the making. Just, I had it all figured out so early, and it felt so perfect to me. The pacing, the writing, the characterization, the concept was so vivid in my mind for so long that when I put it to page, I almost felt like it was too good. And, you know, having that moment where it's like, Amity is trans. She is trans. And just being able to, like, finally say that, have those moments, those big moments of coming out, and the fight with Grom sort of slowly escalating and mutating to this big showdown with her mother, and you know, this is where the material started to get a little... We veer further from the general audiences and closer to, you know, violence. But it, to me, needed to be that way for the sake of showing the emotions at play, that being like choked out by Odalia was sort of a reflection of like how she felt living in her prior situation, and why coming to the Boiling Isles felt so refreshing. And yeah, honestly, it's really funny. Them getting together at the very end, in my original outline of the chapter, I wanted them to just go to Grom with each other, and the finale would be where they get together. I bit the bullet and was like, no, I'm going to do it right now. This is the perfect opportunity. And it was great. I loved doing it, and honestly, I wouldn't do anything different about it. Even like the fight with like Amity's boy self, I felt was like really, like the dysphoric boy self was, to me, perfect. I don't think I would change anything about it. And then I want to bring up a comment that I got around Christmas time last year. This person, I'll put it up on screen, but you know, they brought up that chapter had helped them get through Christmas and deal with their abusive father, and I was like, oh my god. That was the moment to me that I felt like I had made something special. That, you know, this whole For Fun project became something that meant something. And whether it means something to me, or to that person, or to someone else, it was something I wanted to finish, at least with season 1, before I could really put my all into season 2 and beyond. And that ends like the school era, the Grom era, the big moment where everything was coming together. And now you have the last 6 chapters of how the hell do you put this all together? How do you wrap it up? And so we get to Gravesfield, Connecticut. This was the moment where I was like, I'm done doing the finding chapters. We're just doing the normal names. And I'm going to keep doing normal names. From now on, no finding, no more of that. Edric having such a high focus was the goal, because I wanted him to be being on the Boiling Isles, like hinting at him going into the demon realm was like, okay, we're going to do this right now. Originally, I wanted to do a poll post Grom of like, if you wanted one of these 2 characters to go to the demon realm, who would you pick, Edric or Emira? And I'm like, why would I? That's not even a choice, because Edric has always been a lot more involved with Amity's life, and so, you know, at least in this context. So I'm like, okay, yeah, he's going. And so really pushing that, and Emira pushing away from the fact that V is sort of pushing back on the V is like actually Amity's true feelings or whatever, and being like, no, V isn't a copy at all, or like an imposter. V is just Amity. And sort of that non-binary angle where Edric's like, everything feels so off. I don't want to be like an asshole, but also like I kind of am. But it just doesn't feel right. And like, you know, posting on 4chan because he's a weirdo and he uses Discord and plays his video games and stuff. the Smash stuff. I don't know. I like implementing my little fun interests into my writing sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, they're playing Melee. You know, whatever. And they're playing Smash Bros. Melee. And, you know, meeting Masha through 4chan and talking about, you know, Widowbane stuff and sort of really establishing that early on for, you know, future stuff. Because, and this is one of the things I haven't brought up yet, is I wanted to focus on really building out the world so I could move forward with it as expanded of a lore as possible. And just because it's one of those retrospect things that you want to do so much more with the material now that you've seen it all. And a part of this also is, and this is a rule I have when writing, is this specifically, is that this can stand on its own independently of knowledge of the original text. So if you were handed this right now, what you should be able to follow along with what is happening. So while you may have watched the show, you're like, okay, yada yada Widowbane, everyone knows this. You know, this expansion and this more like, hey, this is what's happening situation, I think brings a lot more to the table and makes it more interesting. Chapter 21, A Shopping Trip to Remember. To me, this is one of those chapters that I'm still unsure about writing about, because it is the only, by definition, it's the only filler chapter, because there's no relevant straight up plot that happens in it, but it is extremely important for the character. Body horror. I had a general idea of wanting to do like a, this is how she's on HRT now with the potions, and why she doesn't just take a potion and then boom, cis. You know, explaining that and having that body horror aspect, that dysphoria, and sort of kind of really going in on that. It's definitely the hardest chapter to read. But also it has like it has fun little moments with the characters. Trans Mask Morton, I think, is fun. I stand by this chapter, even if I think it maybe is a bit too mature for the general rest of the series. I still stand by it. Also, I'm sorry if I have less to talk about with these later chapters, just because there's a lot less to explain because it's so recent. And my rationale is a lot more clear. Shopping trip to remember, the dysphoria monster. I think a lot of people actually like enjoyed it a lot more than I thought. I thought it was going to be controversial. I thought everyone was going to be like, you're problematic. You know, you can't write this. This is inappropriate. But I'm glad that people actually stuck around, even in spite of it, or even because of it. And I have a note here about the continuity of the Good Witch Azura. I could never decide whether or not Good Witch Azura 5 happened, was read or not, and also whether or not Hecate and Azura get together in 4 or 5 or 3. Who knows? The rules are all over the place. Fun stuff. Chapter 22. To me, this, if I had to pick the most fascinating chapter, it's this. This is the most fascinating chapter to me. Because it made me appreciate Basha as a character in a way that I don't think I was able to before. And it's gonna sound weird, Because, like, you know, this kind of pretty one-note character that got barely any screen time from the original on purpose, when putting this new context to me was really, really, really important. Because now I've set up this villain, this antagonist that is able to really put a dent into the characters in a way that I hadn't really been able to before with writing someone like Lilith or Hunter or even Bellows. And from this whole deal, it's made me be like, I really like Basha as a character and I want to do more. And having her sort of gain this power and this, like, you know, just high level of destructive magic from Upper Bounds of Magic to be like, this is serious shit. Like, this isn't like, oh, this is a powerful magic spellbook. This is the magical spellbook, powerful magical spellbook. And the elemental bomb being a completely original idea. I was like, this thing just vaporizes stuff. It vaporizes it. It's gone. And, you know, having this character who is mentally unstable after loss, after loss, after loss, get this ability, and then use the book to then get a palisman, to then expand those abilities, and fight the Bat Queen. To me, it was like this elevation of this character into mania, to absolute mania. Going into further chapters, I was like, I really like this character now. And I also want to expand. I'm like, okay, she has two moms. Done. Like, that was a headcanon I had. I think it's semi-canon. At this point, I don't know if the staff have said anything about it, but it's implied, I think, from scenes from flashbacks. But I wanted to play more into that and sort of, you know, have that similar Odalia Alador, like, you need to be strong, but like a lot more in a kind way. Yeah. Having Bat Queen have this establishing thing of I'm protecting these palismen from wild magic, and having Manny sort of, you know, be this positive end of using wild magic for good. Basha is using it for evil. And, you know, having this one palisman respond to her desire to be better. Not be strong and, like, be loose, but be better. And that's why her palisman responds to her, is because she wants to be better. And that's what allows her to win, is that just this never-ending desire to just be better, even if it means being better than someone else. Chapter 23, The Flavor of NB Friendship. It is insane to me that no one ever brought up the fact that I misspelled the title for months. Anyway, really fun setup of basically Masha starting from the position of coercing V to having this, like, genuine connection with them. You know, fun, interesting banter, but also, like, introspection of, like, okay, we never talked about this, but, and the original series never brought up the weight of this. What the hell do you do if magic is real? And what kind of existential crisis are you going to have with the fact that magic is real now? And I had a lot of fun with that. I had a lot of fun with having Masha's more introspective, like, okay, but this is this, and this. Edric has a full-on panic attack about it. And seeing, like, these two different characters react in a very different way, and both of them having their own methods of coping with the potential idea that yes, V is obviously an imposter. I also just wanted more Masha, like just kind of being this outcast while also, you know, having their own, like, yeah, I make friends and I'm bored, so I'm gonna make you as a friend. Other than like the big heart-wrenching scene of Edric being like, no, it's pretty typical stuff. V kind of reflecting on their thing, trying to use their name more than Amity's, having to fill these big shoes created because Odalia like forced Amity to be this perfect gifted kid. Yeah. Chapter 23, the rematch. This chapter has a really strong beginning, a really strong end, and a mediocre middle, in my opinion. I think people really like it, and I think I enjoy it overall. I wish I didn't rush it, but I think it's fine. Setting up more Abomination stuff was very important to me. You know, this big plan concocted by Lilith and Hunter to capture Amity to then lure in Ida was, you know, I felt like it worked. And having this thing in the next chapter basically being like this was doomed all along because weather event, they weren't gonna escape anyways. That was a part of the plan. And having this like near perfect escape plan of like, all right, let's do it. Hey, we're getting out perfectly. When like, you know, Lilith's whole thing of like even being distracted was like, okay, I can be distracted and still be fine. And her finding Basha, it's like, oh well, that patches up my entire problem of being distracted. And so, you know, having some fun, Willow and Gus like, you know, complimenting Lilith to distract her to then have Luce and Amity get completely sidetracked by Basha, who's like, I'm gonna fight you to the death right now, and then puts Amity in a cage and just beats the shit out of Luce. And I'm not sure if the beatdown was too hard or not, because I don't know. I don't know if the beatdown was too hard or not hard enough to show that Basha like just was on a whole other level. And that moment near the end where like Basha's like about to kill Luce and Amity like basically hurts herself going through this like energy cage to then like redirect the attack. And like, you know, her hair like is like cut and like she has like little like burns on her arms and legs and stuff from forcing herself through these sort of magical energy bars before like getting knocked out, like right after, and then getting knocked out before she could even like fight or like do anything as a point of revenge to Basha. And then that leads into the perfect transition into the next 2.5 months of my life dedicated to these two fucking chapters that are the finale. The season finale. Chapter 24, Enlightened Agony. It took me 2 weeks to write. It was very easy. It came to mind. I had a detailed outline of what I wanted to happen, and it went flawlessly. More Hunter stuff was fun, and then the finale, the last the longest chapter by far, being 62 pages in my Google Doc. That was a miserable month and a half because every day I spent writing it I felt more and more guilty that it wasn't out yet, and that I couldn't make this video, and that I couldn't talk about things. And I would be having all these ideas in my head of what I wanted to talk about in this video, and what I wanted to put in my notes, and, you know, just the idea of, like, finally getting it done so that I can stop and take a break and do something else that isn't writing. You know, do art or something. And to me, you know, Enlightened Agony is a really good chapter, establishes a lot of stuff, really brings together the idea that, like, light being a theme with the Nosetas, and you know, having the elemental bomb be like a glyph combo as well, and having this dual fight between Amity and Hunter, and Ida and Lilith, and eventually crossing over, and Ida being able to basically solo both of them until she runs out of energy. I had so much fun with the fight, and it was just the beginning of what would become my life for the next month and a half of writing the true finale, chapter 26. So to talk about the outlining process. The outlining process only gets you so far as the general idea of what you want to do. And I wrote that whole portion afterwards to kind of get Amity out and have the letter and, you know, the redesign and stuff. And then I had to plan a heist. And I spent like 3 days planning the heist, and like all the details of the sewers and the stuff with Wrath and the fight with Basha and all that stuff, and that took a long time. And then I went to write the actual heist, and I was like, okay, cool, we get the plan, we have the strategy guide of you know, meeting things and having references all throughout the story kind of meet up here, and having some implied moments with Amity and Luce and having their deep connection, some implied stuff happening. And then I'm like, okay, that's the easy part. That took me a week or so to get to the actual heist itself and writing it. And writing, I should, if you are not familiar with the writing process, writing action is hard because it requires planning, because combat requires space and action. And without a visual aid, you have to do a lot more explaining of what's happening on the field. And so for me to have this entire chase sequence with this sewer beast, and then have them split up, and now you have this fight with Basha, and Luce getting her ass kicked by Basha, and then Amity fighting Warden Wrath, and then this like kind of melding point where like Lilith explains herself to Ida, and then all this other stuff. I nailed it, but I also feel tired. It's hard to talk about the finale without, you know, with explicit detail, because there's not enough time to reflect on it other than the stuff that I'm like, I'm tired, man. But to me, the biggest moment that I can look back on with the most fondness of the finale is that big moment of Amity versus Bellows, where everything is thrown at the wall and it does not stick, and there's that moment of hope with the 4-way glyph combo, the universal glyph combo, and it allowing her to control the abomination matter, and attack and do something and really show just her desire to win. And putting her to her absolute limit, to me, was a big moment that I wanted to reach with her character, that she finally has broke through that ceiling, but it's too late. And just it being a continuation of this, the fight with Lilith, where she is, again, putting her all into just wanting to kill Lilith, because, you know, all of this is Lilith's fault, mostly. So, you know, her just using the abomination matter that she brought for the sake of, you know, having it and actually being able to use it against Lilith, and it being this perfect, studied thing to, like, be like, yeah, she can do this really well when she has the ability to. And then there's more thoughts. I'm trying to, like, gather my thoughts more, because I have, like, a few notes here about it. What else do I want to bring up here? Elemental bombs being weaker as Basha just crashes out. I really enjoy character breakdowns, because it shows that, like, you know, even the strongest characters are still weak to their own emotions. So, like, having Luz creatively deal with Basha in a way that's more emotional was something I was proud of. The moments with Ida and Amity and the whole, like, she has to leave, this is non-negotiable, you know, destroy the portal door, and now, oh, she has the key on her, oh no. But it being a good bargaining chip later, you know, sort of bringing things around, and eventually the Edric coming into the human realm, or into the demon realm. Why am I saying human realm? The demon realm, and being, like, transported, and because of trying to beat Belos at his own game, trapping Edric into the demon realm unknowingly for Edric, so that being a huge question mark for him. And, you know, the escape, and I'll bring it up as well, I really like the Willow, Gus, and King portion of them just convincing the crowd and riling them up, and King sort of coming to terms with his insecurities and this feeling within him, and talking to this mysterious figure, I don't know who, and using sort of his, you know, newfound charisma from Grom to just do what he thinks is right in his own way, and letting out that feeling, letting out his words to save Amity when she jumps in to block the petrification, to, like, establish the Titan powers are here. And then that sort of ending portion, I rewrote those last 3 scenes maybe 6 or 7 times. It took me a week to write those, and I write for hours daily, so those last few sections were written, rewritten, and I couldn't find anything I liked until basically the last draft. And, you know, the surprise that, hey, Ida's powers are not gone entirely. Same thing with Lilith's, just the slight, there's still potential, but they're basically back to square one. I didn't want her to lose her powers entirely. That was never the plan. but I still wanted to have that moment of, well, it's intentional that she's weakened for the sake of letting other characters get stronger and letting her still have that theme of, being, having to deal with this disability. And I still wanted to retain that. The big moment with Amity and Edric finally meeting each other again, that went pretty much as well as I could have ever wanted it to. And then finally, that last scene, there were about 3 or 4 different endings that I ended up wanting to do. So the first one was a letter, scrapped it. Journal entry, scrapped it. And then I was like, okay, let's just end on the Bellows Hunter stuff. Scrapped it. And then eventually I was like, wait a minute. What if we end with the we need to talk about Dad? That to me, I was like, that's as good as it's gonna get. I feel like we get that cliffhanger and it gets you wanting to read more, or at least I hope it does. And it gets you to want to watch this. And that is all 26 chapters. 25 or 26. It's 26, right? I'm not crazy. Did I miss one? Did I just miscount? I might have missed a chapter. Oh no. I think we're good. I don't think I missed anything important. Maybe I did. Oh, I said chapter 23, Flavor of Envy, Friendship, and then chapter 23, the rematch. No, yeah, we're good. We're good. There's 26 chapters. Now to kind of do the wrap up portion of this, let's talk about scrapped material. I brought up the early season 1 concepts with Warden Wrath being the main antagonist of season 1. Didn't go very far. A lot more flashbacks didn't happen, but I'm glad I didn't, because I feel like having that mystery helps make the impact of Grom a lot stronger. There's the Edric or Emra Human Realm poll for like their focus character. That obviously I would never do again. King was supposed to be a lot more prominent, but what ended up being I had too many characters and storylines going on that I couldn't fit it in. But there's going to be more in season 2 that I'm going to be really focusing on. There was a Gus chapter. The Gus chapter was the glyph combo one with the bees, but there was supposed to be another one that I couldn't find a place for. I have the outline. I have what's going to happen. I just need the right place for it. I am looking forward to it. I just need to find the right time to make it. This sort of goes into the plans for the future section, but in the scrap material, there was supposed to be a body swap chapter. It's still going to happen. I love body swap stories, and I want to have this be a part of it. I want to write one. It's just there wasn't the time yet. It needed to be a post-Grom chapter, but the story was too hot by that point. It was running towards Endgame that there wasn't a time for it. Outside of that, in terms of scrap material, there was some initial art I had been working on for some of the chapters that I've put on the back burner because, one, I can't draw art for every single chapter right now, and two, I'm not good enough because it looks rough. So I'm just leaving it as is for now, and starting with season 2, I will be doing art, or I will have art for each chapter to sort of represent it at the beginning. And that's kind of is a good transition into plans for the future, chapter art. When it comes to just the general structure, I want to do less of the anime fighting. I like the combat. I like writing the combat, but I want more of those calm character moments now that we have simmered down and we've sort of hit this crescendo. We can finally calm down. I also really want to make this more and more of its own original narrative. So it's still going to fit the same little timeline of the original story. You know, things are still going to happen at a certain date. And I'm going to have like a lot, again, that timeline. I'm going to have that timeline in my head of like what I want to happen and when. Chapters will not be 60 pages long. They won't be, I promise. This was a fluke. They're going to be roughly 20 to 25 pages again. Maybe 30, depending on how detailed I want to be. When it comes to season 2 as a whole, I'm unsure if I want to write it as I go like I did with this, or basically plan out the whole thing as a collective and write with that structure. Again, it's going to take or again, I say again as if I've said it before. It's gonna take a bit. I want everyone to be patient with me when it comes to writing this, because I'm gonna be writing other stuff as I go, as I plan. And you know, it may be 6 months or so, or maybe even longer, before I even have anything that I want to share regarding this project that has taken over 2 years. You know, it's wild to me that I started this as just kind of like an impulsive, let's write this, and it's become this grand thing that I've put together, that I'm proud of, that I can say I stuck to this consistently for, I averaged a chapter a month. I've averaged a chapter a month, basically, even with hiatuses. It's crazy that, you know, around when this goes up, it'll have been almost exactly 26 months, or a little over 26 months since I released the first 2 chapters. And it's wild thinking about it, because, you know, I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't writing this, you know. I wouldn't have wanted to be a writer. I wouldn't have found my passion. So it's kind of wild to think about it, and I, you know, stayed motivated. And even though numbers wise this is probably considered a failure for a lot of people, it's my first success with writing, even if it's small. And this is the first time I've straight up talked about my writing like this, because, you know, I don't know, I feel subconscious about it, and, you know, knowing that I can be comfortable sharing it with people and talking about it, you know, brings me a lot of peace of mind and joy that I don't think I've had ever. Anyways, let's finish this off. We're running on almost 2 hours. I said I'd be thorough. As one final thing, leave questions below. If you have any questions about just the entirety of the fic, questions you want answered, just a Q&A style thing. Drop your questions in the comments or in the comments of the actual fic itself for the Q&A, and I will do I'll try to do a mini video, or I'll just respond to them directly. I haven't figured it out yet, but I want to just ask me whatever you want about the series, and I'll do my best to answer them as well as I can, because I want to know what you all think about the whole experience. You know, this isn't the end. We still have much more to go. If I were to put a percentage mark on this whole thing, I would say this is like, we're about 20% done, if that. Because there's just so many vast plans that I have for the future that, you know, it's gonna take a while. And, you know, it'll be fun. So let me know down below what you think. You know, ask me questions about anything, and I'll try my best to answer them. And, yeah. Closing things. Again, it'll be a while till season 2, so, you know, be ready for a long hiatus. It's not dead. I will make season 2. It just will take time. Thank you so much for reading the whole thing, I hope. If you found this through the YouTube algorithm somehow, welcome. Read the fic down below. The Owl House has changed my life, and so has this. So, you know, thank you everyone for, you know, sticking with this for so long. It means a lot. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this long thing of me staring at a camera with faint music in the background while I ramble on and on about something I made. And yeah, I'll see you all in the future. I'm already working on writing another thing right now. I don't know when it'll go up, but it's not Owl House related. Just my own fun little extra thing I wanted to do. And yeah, look forward to that. And I'll see you all around. Bye-bye.